Good morning, AU Gather. It's good to see each one of you. Thank you for those that made sure that we heard and saw the testimony from Johnny at the Engage Summit. I think that is a perfect setup for today, because today we're talking about purpose. So, full disclosure, when I was asked to do the talk here at AU Gather, I was initially a little bit hesitant, because the truth is I really don't like speaking up front. It's an unfortunate career that I chose, because that's what we do. But I don't love speaking up front. But then when I was told that the topic was on purpose and how we find purpose, I got excited, because there are fewer things that I enjoy more than talking about how do you find purpose for your life. How do you find the direction that you're supposed to go? How do you find the place and the space where you fit and you belong and it just feels natural? It's one of those things that I really, really enjoy talking about, and the truth is that I had and still have a very hard time figuring that stuff out for myself. Although I help people do it all the time, I remember one specific time when I was sitting across a table from an interviewer. And I was fairly young. I was coming out from undergrad. I was a senior in college at the time. I was going to be graduating in 6 months with a theology degree and no marketable skills. And I sat across from this interviewer, and the interviewer asked, "So Prescott, what's your story and what's your purpose?" And I thought to myself, that's a really good question that I have absolutely no answer for. See, the truth was, at the time, I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want to go into full-time professional ministry. I had studied theology, but I didn't want to go into ministry whatsoever. But I was really afraid of being unemployed, and it was a time where not many people were hiring new graduates. And I had a theology degree, and as I said, no marketable skills, and so it wasn't like I had many other options. So I went to the interview, and I thought to myself, don't mess it up, because you really need a job. I had these flashes of nightmares of being unemployed and living at home for the rest of my life, and it just didn't seem like that was the direction I wanted to go. But I didn't quite know what direction I should take. I didn't know what direction my life was going. I wasn't quite sure what the focus for my life was. And so in that moment, honestly, I don't remember what I said. I said something, and I got the job. They said, not only are we going to hire you, but we're going to send you to seminary right after this. We're going to not only send you to seminary, so we're going to pay for your schooling. We're going to pay you a stipend so you can live off of while you're in grad school. And I thought to myself, I hit the jackpot, right? So not only did I get free schooling and someone to pay for it and to pay me while I was in school, but I got 3 years that I got to figure out where am I going and what am I doing with my life, right? And I didn't have to go out and work just yet. Today, we're talking about finding purpose, specifically about how you should follow the breadcrumbs of your life to know your story, and knowing your story will help you know your purpose. Know your story to know your purpose. And the truth is, every one of us has a unique, God-given, tailor-made purpose that's just for you. No one else can do the things that God wants you to do. Absolutely no one else can do those things, because God has chosen you specifically to be the person that does those in this world. And I know this because my Bible tells me this in Ephesians chapter 2, and if we could get the slides on screen. I know this because in Ephesians chapter 2, there's a verse that tells me this, Ephesians 2, verse 10. So as they get the slides on screen, I'll read it from here. It says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus, to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do." God's handiwork, created in advance to do specific good works. There are specific things that my Bible says that you are created for, that I am created for, that God has in store for us that no one else can do. Not a single other person. And as you think about this, we think about the struggle so many of us have. If you ask so many of us, what's your purpose? It's a difficult question that most of us can't answer. Might have a fuzzy idea of what we kind of want to do, the fuzzy idea of the things that we're interested in, but we probably won't give you a full fine-tuned description of where we're called and what direction our life is going. And I think the reason why is because so many of us don't know our story. So many of us don't know our story. So many of us don't understand where we came from. So many of us don't understand who we are. So many of us don't understand the story that we uniquely have, but we know the stories people tell about us. We know the stories that were told to us, and we might even know the facts of our story, but we don't know how to link them together to demonstrate where God has been working in our life before and what that direction looks like. And I have a quote, and I'd love to get it on screen if we have the slides up now, which it doesn't look like just yet. So I think they're working on that in the background. They're in Planning Center on the run sheet for our media team. So as they get that up there, I'll start. And it's a quote from a book called To Be Told, and it's written by a guy named Dan Allender. Dan Allender is a narrative psychologist, and he spends his entire life studying what story looks like and how story impacts our understanding of ourselves. And he does this from this Christian perspective, saying, what is the story that God has, how has God been writing your story and working in your story to lead you and to show you direction? And he says this. And he says, so we grow up in a sea of stories told in a way that fits what we want others to know about us. These stories told in most families are a kind of propaganda. The tragedy is that often these stories are simply a form of disinformation. In other words, these stories are false narratives. They're the things that we tell people to give a perception of us. They're the things that we tell to other people to give a part of our story, but they're never quite who we are. You recognize this, right? You tell somebody a part of you, but you don't want to tell them everything. You tell people in certain situations who you are in one way, and you tell people in certain situations who you are in a different way, right? They're these disinformation stories that aren't quite true. And Allender goes on to describe how, there's another slide up there. We're going to go backwards. Allender goes on to describe, so our life is a journey to discover our true name, and he's using this term to say our purpose known through our story, though sadly many of us never choose to begin that search. Most of us never enter into our stories because it's risky, it's scary. Entering into our story means that we have to confront the things about us that we don't like. The times that we had the worst experiences of our life, entering into our story is kind of like entering into a dark, scary forest. And there's a story about two kids who did that. There's a story about two kids who did that. There were two kids that were led out into the forest by somebody that meant ill intent for them. It's a fairy tale. And these two kids recognized this, and they didn't want to get lost in the woods. They wanted to find their way back to safety. And these kids, what they ended up doing was one took a handful of pebbles and stuck it in his pocket. The other took a handful of breadcrumbs and stuck it in her pocket. And what these kids did is, as they walked along through the woods, they would leave a little trail of a pebble here, a breadcrumb there, a pebble here, a breadcrumb there, and they kept walking and winding through this dark, scary forest until finally they got to the point where they could turn around and start retracing their steps. And what they did is they would find the places where they made a turn, right turn here, oh, there's a pebble, that's the way I go. They'd take another step forward and they'd say, where's the next breadcrumb? Where's the next pebble? Where is the way that I can find my way back and out of this dark, scary forest? And what I think that lesson teaches us is that today, you and I need to retrace the breadcrumbs of our life. You and I need to retrace the breadcrumbs of our story. We need to find the major turns of our life, because the major transitions of our life, and retrace the major events of what has happened to us and really understand who we are as told by our story. And what I think you'll find is that at each major turn, at each twist in your story, you're going to find little pebbles of purpose that have been placed there. And those little pebbles of purpose, those little breadcrumbs of purpose, give hint at where you are going, where the broad strokes God has been leading and directing you all your life. And if you follow them and link them together, you're going to have this cohesive narrative of how He's worked in your past, how He's working in your present, and where you're going for the future if you let Him. Little pebbles of purpose that at the end of them, when you connect them all, I believe that you find the face of God. Retracing your story. Today, I'm here to tell you, to know your purpose, you have to retrace your breadcrumbs. And I'm only going to share with you one breadcrumb from my life. Unfortunately, due to time's sake, I can't share many more of them. And the truth is, that would be terrifying if I did, because I don't know if I'm quite ready to share everything. But I'm going to share one breadcrumb. And I hope that from that one breadcrumb and maybe a lesson or two, it will inspire you to dive into your own story and see what there is in store for you. For me, I ended up in that interviewer's chair because in high school I felt the vivid call to go study theology. I didn't feel the call to go be a pastor. I felt the call to go study theology because I needed it. You see, in high school, I found God, or God found me, in a place that was as rigid and formal and dead spiritually as you can imagine. I was actually at an academy, a boarding academy, an Adventist boarding academy. Well, it had the name Adventist in it. And I was there, and I had become this apathetic individual who didn't really care about religion because I had this horrible picture of God shown to me by many of the individuals around. But God still worked. God still found me. He said, go study theology. And so I ended up going and studying and trying to unlearn and relearn who he was. And what that was for me is it was this process of trying to figure out, what does this connect with this like deep-seated passion I have to go do something meaningful in this world, to go do something that would do good for this world. You see, growing up, ever since I was young, I had this idea that I wanted to go do something good in this world. I wanted to do something that would impact not just here and now, but places far and wide outside of my neighborhood, places that would places that I had never seen before, places around the globe. I had this global idea that I wanted to do something good. And for me, I didn't see how theology would connect with that because in my mind, pastors got up and they talked. I didn't see much good coming from it at that time. Because growing up, I grew up in a rather interesting background. So when I was born, my parents were living in the Middle East. My dad was working as a software engineer for an airline company. And they were living in the Middle East, and when they found out they were going to have me, the decision was made that my sister, my mom, my dad, they would all fly back to the States so that I could be born in the U.S., and so if I ever wanted to be the U.S. president, I would meet all the legal requirements. It was the thought process my parents had, and it was a story that they told me over and over and over again that if I ever wanted to be president, I would meet all the requirements to do so. So Prescott, go off and do big things. And so from a young age, I wanted to do big things. We still lived overseas afterwards. We flew back and we lived overseas afterwards. And my dad, working for an airline company, meant that he got airline miles for days, which at that time was pretty awesome. Business Select, Economy, Coach, they all were like first class today. And the stories were told to me of how we would travel across most of Western Europe, across parts of Asia, and we would go just because we could. And so we would do things like go to Amsterdam and sit on a river cruise for an afternoon lunch. And we would do things like this because we had airline miles, and that's my mom, my dad, myself, my sister, when I was younger. And so I, unfortunately, was too young to remember most of this, so most of this was told to me through stories from other people. And so I was told about all these grand adventures that we had, all these times and places that we went and did things. And as I was growing up, I remember I would hear about the place, and I would run to our living room globe, and I would turn to the globe, and I would look at the country, I would look at the place, and I would say, okay, how far away is this from where I am? Man, that's a world away. Like, what does this mean? Like, I had this sense that, okay, I'm supposed to do big things, and I've been all these places, like, I gotta do something that impacts the entire world, right? And I had this mentality growing up that like that was what I was here for, to do something big. But my story was impacted by events outside of my control pretty early on. So I'm a kid that grew up in the 9/11 and post 9/11 era, and the attack on 9/11 on the Twin Towers defined much of my childhood. So I remember vividly being in my elementary school as the teachers huddled around the TV. The principal had come in saying that something major had happened. And I recognized that the world had changed in that moment. I didn't know how it had changed. I wasn't sure what was going on in New York, but I knew something had changed. And what I learned after that day was that my own life would change. I recognized that my story in no way compares to those who were directly impacted in New York or had family members directly impacted. But my own life changed in reaction to that. You see, no longer was I Prescott Khair, the son of a South Asian immigrant who used to tell people that he lived in the Middle East previously. Rather, I was just Prescott. The Prescott who lived in suburban Atlanta and who loved the Atlanta Braves and who rode his bike down to the childhood swimming pool with the rest of the neighborhood kids. That was the extent of the story about myself that I would tell. That was the extent of the story about myself that I was allowed to tell. I quickly learned to give evasive answers when anyone asked more about my family history. And I learned this because the danger was real. There was real danger to be someone of the other group. There was real danger because in the post-attack frenzy, individuals who had no direct connection to the heinous crimes committed by a handful of madmen were lumped in with the whole group. Individuals who simply looked similar or had similar last names or origin stories that seemed too close for comfort. Individuals like these, unfortunately, were murdered in their homes or at their gas stations as they ran their businesses. And so for me, my life changed. It meant that part of my life was closed off not only to myself, but to anyone else, never to be shared again. And this impacted me greatly, because the irony of this was that some of my own family members had protected this country from events similar to 9/11, yet they had lived their stories in the shadows, and they would remain in the shadows because secrecy was paramount. I knew this, but I could never share it. I knew the bravery and the heroics, but those would stay silent. And so I lived in this interesting world where I wasn't able to share quite who I was, but I took on a story that was told for me, a story that was meant to protect and did what it was supposed to do. And I recognized in that moment that I had to do something good with my life. I saw a lot of bad out there, and I knew that I wanted to do something good, coupled with this idea that the world was like, I wasn't meant just for something small here right where I was, but I was meant for something big. I felt this like weight even from a young age that I needed to do something good to counteract all the bad that was out there, all the bad that people were doing. That there was something I personally had to do, and for some reason I took this on as like the superhero's cape. Like as a kid, this is what I thought. And as I think about this, I think about the one breadcrumb that I can share today. And the breadcrumb is that tragedy always moves our stories forward in a way that shalom never could accomplish. Tragedy always moves our story forward in a way that shalom could never accomplish, in the sense that tragedy moves your story and pushes you forward in a way that if everything was happy and going perfectly for your life, it never would. Tragedy is something that catalyzes and moves and causes growth, sometimes in forced moments, that makes you who you are. And it can make you better, or it can break you. Tragedy is your origin story. Breadcrumb number one, your tragedies are your origin stories. The tragedies that you experience as a kid, the tragedies that you experience as an adult, these are the things that shape you, and they cause you to grow if you let them. Much like a superhero taking on a new identity, much like a superhero growing in the face of tragedy, you think about like the Spider-Mans, the Batmans, the Wonder Womans of cinema. They all have origin stories that root in tragedy. But from those tragedies, they grow and they become someone that does good with it. You too, your stories, your tragedies are the origin stories for the purposes that you have. They are the places that you feel the pains, you feel the hurts, you feel that center of something just quite isn't right. And those are the places that if you let them, they can very well grow you. But they can also break you. They can make you bitter. They can make you jaded. They can make you violent. They can make you angry. They can make you many things if you let it. But they can also make you grow. They can make you more compassionate, more caring, more resilient spiritually, mentally, physically. They can make you more intentional with how you relate to other people. Those tragedies can be the very catalysts for becoming your triumphs later in life. Your tragedies are just as important as your successes. And entering into your story, you have to deal with each one of these to see where you have grown. Tragedy, though, is only useful if you process it. Tragedy is only useful if you understand how it shaped you. And that's why I tell you that if you don't have a counselor, if you don't have somebody that can help you process the pains and tragedy points in your life, you're missing out on your growth. If you don't have somebody that's trained, a professional that you can talk with and you can work with to help you understand what's happened to you and how that's changed you, you're missing out on your growth. I'm thankful because as a kid, living in this really weird liminal space of knowing who I was but not being able to relate that, as a kid, I had an amazing group of people around that would be able to guide me and steer me away from the bad self-medication or the harm that can easily happen after tragedy, after not being able to process the world around you. I remember I had an individual, his name was Mr. Carter. He was a teacher in my school. And Mr. Carter was one of the first people that spoke words of affirmation and life publicly for me. And I remember this guy, he would tell me things like, Prescott, don't be stupid. You have something that you're made for. Prescott, you have an amazing purpose ahead of you. Prescott, you have so much to look forward to. I remember hearing this stuff, and he would say this in front of the class, right? And I remember thinking to myself, how amazing it is to hear this said publicly, because these are the things that I could never say myself, the things that I felt, but I could never say, the things that I thought, okay, maybe I do have a purpose, something that's there waiting for me. And he said these things, and he spoke these words over my life, and I can only thank him with my words because he did an amazing service to me. He was one of those individuals that kept me on the straight and narrow and helped me process the things that I understood. And later in life, I would go see a counselor who helped me better process what happened growing up and how that impacted me and the things that I learned from it. And I want to tell you that your tragedies are your origin stories. And I want to make it clear that God doesn't love that you have to experience tragedy. God doesn't love that you experience the evil in this world. God doesn't love that, but rather, he takes what the enemy meant for evil and he turns it into your good, if you'll let him. If you think about the story of Joseph, the guy was sold into slavery, but then his purpose to save the world was accomplished through horrible, adverse circumstances, that God took what the enemy meant for evil and turned it into his good. And that's the same thing that he will do for you today if you let him. He'll take your tragedy and he'll make it a triumph. He'll take your tragedy and turn it into how you fuel your drive for purpose. And so as you connect breadcrumbs in your life, as you look back at the major turning points in your life, the times that you moved, the times that your family was disrupted, the times that you developed a better self-awareness, as you start linking these ideas together, you're going to have this clearer and more defined sense of your purpose in this world. I know mine has grown over the years, mine has been shaped over the years, and mine has continued to be more refined because of all the times I've dived in and saw what God has done in the past, how my life has been leading in one direction and where that goes. But I think about this too. From the time I was a kid to understanding that I was supposed to do something good, to hearing words from other people saying, Prescott, affirming, you're supposed to do something good in this world, keep preparing, keep prepping for it, keep focusing on your purpose. From all that time, there's a consistent theme that I'm recognizing was in my story. And that was that I had to keep saying yes. I had to keep saying yes. I had to make a habit of saying yes, to being open to what was next, to being okay with leaving what I knew and what I'd grown comfortable to, and keep moving forward to whatever God had placed in front of me for the next time, for the next move in my life. I had to be able to keep saying, yes, I'm going to move forward. I had to make a habit of saying yes. And so today I want to remind you and let you know that you need to make a habit of being open to what God is placing in front of you. even if it doesn't seem like it's quite in line with what you're looking for, if it's leading you to the purpose that God's been placing on your heart, the intersection between your passions and your desires and the world's greatest needs, if it's leading you to this place, it's a good place to say yes to it. Because God has a habit of taking the long way to getting you to where you need to go. Because on that journey, you're going to be grown and stretched, and you're going to pick up skills and talents that you need for the task ahead of you. And remember, there's something that only you can do. But you have to make yes a habit. Yes to the scary times. Maybe that yes is saying, here at Andrews, I need to take some time off and go study abroad or be a student missionary. Maybe that yes is saying, I need to refocus in on what it means to use my passions for something bigger than myself. Maybe that yes is saying, I need to say no to other things so I can say yes to what God has in store for me. But you need to make yes a habit. You need to make yes a habit. For me, in my life, saying yes meant accepting the job, coming to seminary, and at seminary, amazing things happen, right? So I met my wife here at Andrews, and my wife is actually here in the congregation, right? Not congregation, the audience right there, with my little girl, Eliza. And my wife is a trooper because Eliza was up at 1:30 this morning, and Carissa made sure that she was well taken care of all through the night, even though she wouldn't sleep. And so she is exhausted, but she's here supporting today. But saying yes and making that a habit led to amazing things like meeting my wife, who became one of those people that really encouraged me to see the counselor, to help process the pain, to help understand where my purpose lay, to being my supportive partner, to saying yes led me to places where I went to my first job and ended up hating my entire time there. And my wife and I we had this awful time that the only bright spot was like going to the Thai restaurant and the pizza place after work and venting about how awful everything was. But in those moments, we both were grown and we were stretched and we developed skills that we hadn't had before, because you see, once you get married, right, it's no longer just your purpose, it's like this joint purpose between you and your significant other, and you're on this journey together and God's using both of you. But saying yes led from that place to, even though we were ready to make the move and go off into the corporate world and do our own thing, it led us to say yes when God said, hey, I want you to come back to Andrews, the place that you said you'd never return to. And even now, we still have a habit of saying yes to what's next for us. We're not moving anytime soon, I don't think at least. But we're here, right? Because we're learning the skills and we're growing, and we're not telling this story from the point of view that we've accomplished our purpose and we've done everything we need to. No, very much in the middle of still trying to figure out what everything means like for our life. Saying yes is a continual process, and right now we're in the middle of what that looks like. I don't actually know the next step. I don't know what that means to do big things on a world scale. I'm getting to do things here that impact the world, and that's part of it, but I don't know what else comes from it. And I thoroughly enjoy everything I do here. I can genuinely say that. I enjoy the people I work with. I've gotten to meet some amazing people on this journey. I have some incredible coworkers. Some of them are louder than others. I'm thinking about Danielle and Jose, but we love them. And on this journey, I've met these amazing people that have been a part of our story. And I think about how God is still using this story, my story, to accomplish something good. Even if I don't quite know what that looks like just yet, what I do know is I've had enough time saying yes, enough times tracing the breadcrumbs back through my life, that I can trust him with the future. And when he says, hey, it's time to go, it's time to do something else, it's a much easier yes. Because I know what's in front of me is so, so good, because he's been leading me all through my past. And that's why I want to leave with you today. I don't get to tell you too much because the story is longer, but I hope it's enough for you to dive into your story, to understand what that means for your purpose. And I have a QR code up here on the screen, because in our office, we do coaching for purpose. It's part of what we do as an office, help you find your purpose and your calling, your direction in life. And so if you're interested in trying to identify where it is God wants you to go, I encourage you to sign up. That coaching helps guide you as you dive into your story, and see the places where God has worked, to see the strengths and the talents and the giftings that you have that no one else does. And it helps you understand where it is God is leading you for the future. So if in any way you want to dive into your story, scan that QR code. There's also a link there that if you want more information on the free counseling resources we have here to process your own tragedies, there's a link there too. Because your story, knowing your story, will help you find your purpose. You just have to follow the breadcrumbs. Thanks for your time.